Hey, welcome to Rontime. Here it is, April already. Surrounded by a bounty of spring products, all brought to you by the Koch brothers, two of the wealthiest Americans who have vowed to put $1 billion behind the conservative candidate of their choice to run for president of the United States next term. These are the children of an oil refiner from Russia who left to escape communism. And they're in all kinds of businesses, and they make all kinds of products. And the reason I'm mentioning them is that many of these products are manufactured in facilities in for-profit prisons. And the labor rate that they pay for that is 20 cents an hour. And the prison then extracts 40% of that for room and board, and as cost of housing prisoners, they're required to work, apparently. There's a guy that's been in a for-profit prison in Arizona for 7 Christmases in a row. He hasn't had a hearing for deportation back home to Brazil, where he came from, without proper documentation to get into the country. I mention that because the labor rates and the practices of labor in Brazil are as close to slavery in the 21st century as you can get, with the exception of for-profit prisons like Correctional Corporation of America or GeoCorp, all of whom were created in the states to house prisoners from other states, because there are so many prisoners in America that they have to build prisons faster than they can build schools. As a matter of fact, the American population of 5% of the world houses 25% of the world's incarcerated people. And believe it or not, many of them have been incarcerated without having any kind of a hearing to determine whether or not they should be eligible to be released on their own recognizance for nonviolent crimes like possession of marijuana, or whether they should be bonded out with some kind of a bond and released. But the way the Koch brothers have negotiated their deals with these for-profit prisons in the state of Arizona, if they're not 90% occupied, then the taxpayers of the state of Arizona make up the difference on the bed count. And that guarantees the Koch brothers and their investors a return on investment that is incredible. And it's also incredible to believe that in the 21st century, 95% of the investors in these for-profit prisons are Republicans. You would think if they were such a good idea, there'd be about a 50-50 spread between Republicans and Democrats, both wanting to incarcerate people for such heinous crimes as smoking marijuana or possessing marijuana. And that's been true for quite some time, ever since the Nixon administration, when the Attica State riots were the justification for mandatory sentences and really, really stiff penalties for first-time nonviolent offenders. When you add to that the fact that the police in Chicago and New York have a stop and frisk policy that does not include the normal process of justifying some reason to stop and frisk. But when you look at the incarceration rates in the United States, it turns out that 4 out of 5 incarcerated people in the United States are persons of color. And Therefore, statistically, 1 in 3 black American men is likely to have a incarceration record and have been imprisoned at some point in his life. When you put that demographic to work inside these prisons where people are working for 20 cents an hour for the Koch brothers, you see why there's a pattern like Ferguson where the police are, 93% white in a community that's over 50% black. And in many cases, the way that we've trained the police to deal with all crimes is to suit up as if they're going to combat or to war. And so they're prepared for people to riot against them for simple traffic stops. And you clearly can see the difference between a European police car and an American undercover narcotics police car. Seems like the Europeans have really bright day glow green and orange stickers so they can be seen anywhere, and they're there to help people, and that's their mission. And if they have to arrest you because you're being some sort of a criminal, then they will. But in America, we've got it set up so that they're playing this game of cops and robbers ever since 1937, when cannabis was declared a Class 1 narcotic in closed hearings before the Congress of the United States. Harry Anslinger, the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, said that darkies who smoke reefer think they're good enough to dance with white women. And that's why cannabis is illegal in the United States and why it's a Class 1 felony when possession of heroin or cocaine are only Class 2s. It's kind of bizarre, but see, it's easy to smell. A dog can tell, it stays in your hair for 28 days. There's a lot of things we know scientifically about it that are not allowed to be discussed in the United States because of gag orders from the Drug Enforcement Administration under the Nixon administration made it illegal to question the classification of cannabis. Even though, if you look back at the hearings, the classification hearings, the doctors from the American Medical Association who were there to testify on behalf of medical science were told to sit down and shut up by Harry Anslinger, that he wasn't going to listen to their boring testimony, and that the continued classification by the Nixon administration to open up all kinds of powers, including RICO, where they can take everything you own because they say, oh, you must have bought it with money that you made from selling this here marijuana. And, so somebody obviously is benefiting from the system the way it is. Otherwise, the first black president of the United States, Barack Obama, would have already signed the Harry J. Anslinger proclamation, making April 20th National Day of Gardening for hemp and cannabis across the United States, and a day of restoration of the civil rights of everyone arrested under these statutes because of the use of a fraudulent artifice before the Congress of the United States to classify it a Class 1 narcotic when no one has ever OD'd on it. And instead, we have all kinds of problems in our cities today in America because there's stronger, cheaper heroin, and there's also a steady supply of prescription narcotics and painkillers. So we're seeing really high rates of people becoming either dependent, addicted, or dead because of archaic drug laws that treat it as though it's some sort of a crime that needs to be dealt with by incarcerating people, keeping them from their civil rights and keeping them from their community, which is the place where you should be turning for help when you find yourself in a situation where you don't control your own life, that some substance has taken control of it in your absence. Well, I can see how that happened in America. After all, the CIA and some other covert portions of our government were allowed to run drugs to make off-the-book cash balances for their undercover operations and things like that. And wherever there's policing and enforcing on drugs, there's instances and cases where drugs just disappear in the hands of the police. In my particular case, the evidence was stolen from the Drug Enforcement Agency locker room for evidence. And if that fact had been revealed to me, I would not have been convicted for possession because they had no evidence to hold me. So, apparently it's okay for the DEA to walk into your trial where your life is going to be altered forever and lie to you. Apparently, it's been okay to lie to the American people ever since 1937. And we've established organizations that will not only insist that they can lie to you, they can lock you up for the thing they're lying about. So, if 5% of the world's population has to have 25% of the world's incarcerated human beings to be a civilized, successful democracy based on the consumption of fossil fuels and based on the presumption that we should always be at war, therefore we need a huge defense department, and we need to include them in the process of interdiction and interception of drugs coming to America from outside. So, as long as that entire federal organization, with all of its tentacles into every part of your life, has the power and ability to continue to lie to you since 1937 about a substance that is not narcotic and not addictive, though it may be psychologically habit forming. Well, if we want to talk about habits, let's talk about the habit of tobacco and the fact that that is a legal licensed tax product in all 50 states and that the feds support that process because they get tax money from it. And yet, isn't that interesting? How many hundred thousands of Americans die every single year from lung cancer from tobacco products, or from throat cancer, or from tongue cancer? All y'all that like to chaw that stuff. So, here we are surrounded by retail products, the origin of which is prison labor. Talking about other retail products, the origin of which is the American farm. And isn't it interesting that on the American farm until recently, you weren't allowed to grow hemp. You weren't allowed to make hemp cloth. You weren't allowed to make hemp plastics. You were not allowed to make hemp oil, which will burn in your diesel truck with nothing but a common filter. See, because Randolph Hearst, who, by the way, the state of California and the foundation is completely restoring the huge swimming pool at Hearst Castle in California, a definite benefit to a private individual by a government body. Hearst and his fellow newspaper publishers did not want competition from hemp paper, so the federal government made it illegal for anybody except the federal government to grow hemp in the United States. Until recently, when the citizens of the state of Colorado saw that there was nothing wrong with growing hemp and that it is now a licensed legal product in the state of Colorado, as is cannabis, by the way. So there are 2 states where it's completely legal to possess cannabis, and the other states you can still be charged with a federal felony for possession, even if it's your first offense and you're a nonviolent criminal and you have no prior record. You can be put in jail for simple possession. And when I spoke to Mayor Rothschild of Tucson about this, he said that his preference, of course, is to give the second chance to people who have been arrested for nonviolent crimes, including possession of cannabis. And it seems to me that's not a working methodology. By that time, you've already wasted the police time and effort chasing a law that has no reason. You've stacked up time in the court. If there's going to be hearings, you've wasted all of those resources of the state, and you have produced nothing in terms of change of behavior in the person, nothing in terms of change of behavior in the habits, attitudes, and practices of the American people in all 50 states. Because Americans consume so much cannabis, there were literally 40,000 to 60,000 people in Mexico who died in the drug wars over the supply routes, over the dominance in the market, and the cartels trying to be totally in charge of pretty remote areas of Mexico, and for a while succeeding at it. You know, the United States is still in a program where they spray toxic chemicals on plants in other people's countries as part of our drug interdiction and drug interception programs. Absolutely amazing that to this day, the United States of America has never paid Vietnam the $3.5 billion that was supposed to be given to them for reparation from Agent Orange, which was sprayed so freely that now the grandchildren of American veterans are showing symptomatic diseases directly related to the dioxins contained in chemicals that their grandparents were exposed to in the war in Vietnam. American children are showing symptomatic diseases caused by dioxin poison from Agent Orange sprayed on the fields of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia when Richard Nixon refused to get us out of the Vietnam War when he had a perfect opportunity in Paris at a peace talk. But instead, he had to continue the process so that American domination would be feared all over the world and American power would be respected by those dirty pinko commie nasty little pajama gooks that were running around killing us because that was their country. So imagine that. If the federal government of the United States told the truth about Agent Orange and about Vietnam and paid the war debts that we owe them, then it wouldn't seem so hypocritical that we're barking at Greece and Germany for war reparations from the Second World War. It also would make a lot more sense if the United States in its policies, had laws that were based on fact and not upon statements before the Congress of the United States by complete white supremacist, racist liar. Harry Anslinger Jr., the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. So, if Mayor Rothschild and the council in Tucson and the chief of police in Tucson don't see the wisdom in moving forward and getting off the old policy of arresting people and then giving them a second chance in the community instead of incarceration, you're still costing the process. You're still costing the human capital. You're costing the time in the courts and the system that could be used to solve real crimes, instead of playing cops and robbers with the potheads. Duh. So, again, I appeal to the President of the United States, the Congress of the United States, the Drug Enforcement Administration of the United States to have the courage to step up, to come forward, to tell the truth, and to establish a process for reconciliation and restoration of the rights of any person in America who was ever arrested under statutes enacted by a racist pig through the use of a fraudulent artifice before Congress of the United States. And if the leadership of the United States shows the courage to step up, tell the truth, reverse the process, and end for-profit prisons as a source of statistical information for employment in the United States, to show how the Republicans have so positively contributed to our economy ever since the Wall Street collapse in 2007 and 8 and the housing bubble that caused it all, because American law enforcement has their eye off the ball. They'd rather play easy games for money over here in incarcerating people for possession of cannabis than do real law enforcement. Why? It's easy, it's cheap, it's fast, and they can get all kinds of federal grants and support, etc., 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 if they continue to tell the same white lie. The Harry J. Anslinger white lie. That darkies who smoke reefer think they're good enough to dance with white women. Well, in today's 21st century real world, where 5% of the world's population has 25% of the incarcerated souls on earth, democracy's a joke, law enforcement's a joke, and the drug war in the United States is an absolute failure. If you look at countries who have solved this problem successfully, you will see that they are legalizing it, that they have completely decriminalized it, and that they do not treat it like a source of income for 21st century slavery. So, once again on Rontime, thank you for inviting me into your viewing space. I love to hear feedback. Give me a call or send me an email. And since it's April, happy birthday to my granddaughter. See ya, kids.